Christ's return in the Etheric. Previously, we discussed the effects of the mystery of Golgotha, especially in relation to its karmic results. We began by asking, what were the consequences, both for humanity and for Jesus Christ? Christ too was human, and thus created human karma. What were the consequences of the fact that he was judged, scourged, crowned with thorns, forced to bear the cross, and then crucified? We also tried to understand the matter of how, 19 centuries ago, Jesus Christ worked on earth in such a way that his path involved a continued descent from the heights into the earth's interior, and how, across this vertical Christ line, a horizontal line was formed by the way human beings acted toward him. Christ took the vertical path of descent. It is crossed by the horizontal line of humanity, which expresses the fact that humanity judged and condemned Christ to death on the cross. The karmic consequence of that human relationship to Jesus Christ means that in the future, Christ will be able to reappear not only in the vertical line of descent, but especially in the horizontal dimension. In other words, space is karmically at his disposal, having become available to him through his suffering and the unjust judgment by human beings. He will be able to take as many steps horizontally toward humanity as human beings took against him through their aggression. We have indicated that because he was judged, he will appear as a judge, not to dole out retribution, but to awaken the human conscience. Through his visitation to all human beings on the earth, the first step of his return will manifest as feelings of shame, followed by a reassessment of all the values held by human souls. And because Christ was scourged, jostled, and struck, he will be able to reach out and touch and move the people of our time. This will be expressed as increased courage in human hearts. Courage to begin everything anew once people have reevaluated their values. The karmic consequence of having crowned the Christ with thorns will be expressed in Christ's next step. He will assign tasks or labours of love so that there will be many guardians of the Christ mystery. Those guardians of the Christ mystery will bear witness to meeting him. In addition to seeing him, that meeting will involve receiving tasks from Christ. The fact that 19 centuries ago he had to carry the cross will lead karmically to healings, so that dry, wooden, human ether bodies will be enlivened and reanimated. A rich inner life will arise for those who, because of their dried and shriveled ether bodies, previously had no basis for such an inner life. And finally, another karmic consequence will be that Jesus Christ will awaken a new capacity in human souls. This will be a faculty for a new etheric clairvoyance. This new etheric clairvoyance will have an inner connection with the words Christ spoke during the crucifixion. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. This clairvoyance, which can also be called karmic clairvoyance, will arise so that people will be able to be conscious of what they do. People will be given the possibility of acting in such a way that they will realize how their act relates to the past and their consequences for the future. Now we will try to understand these things further and consider Christ's steps spatially from yet another perspective. If we view the series of steps as the way Christ uses the karmic consequences at his disposal from the mystery of Golgotha, and if we look at the 5 possibilities that will approach human beings, then we can read something from our soul pictures. It is really a matter of another repetition of the preceding sacrifices, which we have mentioned these manifestations several times. We have seen that the Saturn, Sun and Moon sacrifices were repeated prior to the mystery of Golgotha, and that the fourth and due sacrifice was the mystery of Golgotha. We have also seen that on this occasion all of Christ's sacrifices were also repeated in the Last Supper, the night in Gethsemane, and on Golgotha during the crucifixion. It is the same for the etheric return of Christ. The preceding acts of sacrifice will again be repeated. Now we can understand that the awakening of conscience in the human soul corresponds to what happened earlier in the physical nature of humankind. This was during the Lemurian epoch, when human beings first stood erect. The first sacrifice of Christ repeats again, not physically this time, but in the human soul organization. Human beings became upright psychologically or in the soul when the conscience is awakened. They will feel the eye of the spiritual world upon them. That experience will awaken the human conscience, first still in mental feelings of shame, and then as a reassessment of all values. In the second step of Christ's return will awaken courage for new creativity. This means that the conscious, higher part of human beings will be lifted out of the experience of remorse and despair. People will gain the courage to begin afresh despite everything they have experienced in the sense of despair. People have experienced great failure in every area. Today we can be satisfied with one thing or another, but in the light of Christ we will be unable to rest content. Despair will arise, but the creative aspects of human souls will be released from that despair. This will correspond to the second sacrifice of Christ, when the soul body was released from the life processes. The third step of Christ is experienced by human beings when tasks are assigned, as though people are given crowns of thorns by the Christ. This will lead to a new way of representing the spiritual world and the being of Christ in the world. We all know about the guardian of the threshold, who has the responsibility of guarding the threshold to the spiritual world. Some of his tasks will be transferred to human beings, those who are willing to accept them. Consequently, just as the third sacrifice of Christ involved consonantal speech, now the capacity for a new spiritual language will arise. This will no longer be merely a language of vowels and consonants, but one containing a new element of intonation. This element will have the ability to imbue ordinary concepts and words with an essence that vibrates inwardly and reveals more than the mere word one uses. People will learn to speak thoughts with words. Those thoughts will be embodied in one's word that now carries something greater. We can say that moral tone or moral substance will flow into speech and give the power of conviction to language. Then not only will words based on experience be convincing, but also those simple words and sentences based on the delicate breath of moral values. This will flow in through the new way of representing the spiritual world, a way of speaking in the name of the spiritual world. With the fifth step of Christ, a certain element is repeated, the element connected with the crucifixion, death, and resurrection. This will open human eyes for karmic clairvoyance. For the first time, the mystery of Golgotha will be repeated, but now with an added new element. It will consist of what corresponds to the fourth step, insofar as human ether bodies become endowed with the vitality needed for the development of a rich inner life. In addition, a new karmic clairvoyance will be evoked through the activity of the Christ being. This etheric clairvoyance will be entirely new and not a repetition. It will be a result of the fifth sacrifice of Christ. Try to understand this new fifth sacrifice. The preceding ones were repetitions. The earlier sacrifices involved harmonizing the physical, ether, and astral bodies and the I. The fifth sacrifice, however, harmonizes the human manas organization, or spirit self. Harmonization of the form always comes before the harmonization of the essence, which can take effect later and develop on the foundation thus created. This is precisely a matter of harmonizing the manas, the relationship between the I that ascends and the ego that descends. It is the harmonizing of the two I's. The upper I sees the mysteries of goodness, the future, and the world of spirit, while the lower I perceives the mysteries of evil. The manas organization is harmonized by uniting these I's in the I am of the Christ impulse. This is their axis of vision, which includes potential communication with the spirit world while conscious and awake. It is possible to achieve the levels of imagination, inspiration, and intuition through the separation and reunion of two aspects of our I being, in which something new has thus been produced without receiving the old atavistic faculties of clairvoyance. We can draw this image of two eyes, with visual access uniting them. This union will become permanent in harmony with the human spiritual organization, and not something that existed only at certain times during special states of meditation. The harmonization of the manas organization gave rise to a permanent connection between the upper I and the lower ego. This axis of vision of both eyes, or axis of vision in the manas organization, with the upper seeing into the upper world and the lower seeing into the lower world, unites both as a continuing, ever-present faculty. With Christ's etheric return, therefore, we are dealing not only with the memory of the past, but also a new memory of the future. In other words, the awake human daytime consciousness would perceive both what the upper eye is able to perceive in the future of the spiritual world is always in the future, and what the lower eye would remember from the past by reading the etheric body, thus gathering knowledge from earlier incarnations. This attainment of knowledge from the past and knowledge of the future through the activity of the two eyes is linked by a unifying memory stream. Rudolf Steiner once wrote a mantra that begins, "In the beginning was the power of memory." For the human organization, the significance of the etheric return is expressed in these words. It will permanently link the upper and lower worlds within human consciousness, a link that makes possible the intended power of memory. By awakening memory, the possibility of recognizing karma arises. What is karmic clairvoyance? Rudolf Steiner stated that, at the beginning of the 1930s, a small number of people would have this clairvoyance, and that eventually the number of people would increase. This question can be answered to some extent by the previous diagram of the manas organization coming into being. The following drawing will help further. Imagine here the stream of the spiritual world descending, and the lower ego looking back into the past. The connection between 2 points can be seen through this image of looking forward to the future in the spirit world and looking back to a point in the past and to what has happened then on earth. For example, say a man experiences something in the past through the lower eye. With both eyes, he seeks a corresponding distant point in the future. Then he discovers what is to happen on earth as the karmic result of these two factors. We can say that it is a matter of building a certain figure whereby the future is seen and the temporal and spatial place is discovered where the karmic result of the past can be realized. This faculty will arise not as a kind of trick or acquired dexterity, rather it will have varied degrees of clarity exactly because it will be a faculty instead of a mere skill. Through this concept of karmic clairvoyance, we can understand that people will increasingly begin to know what they are doing in the stream of karmic events. They will experience and recognize karma in such a way that an event of the past will always be experienced in connection with a future event. This will not be a general theory of karma, but real knowledge of concrete, specific karmic configurations. This ability will indicate the etheric return of Jesus Christ for humankind. We mentioned that the etheric return of Christ will also have the significance for the world of nature. When Christ appeared 19 centuries ago, he came for the benefit of humanity. His descent took place vertically in the sphere of human existence. The consciousness of nature, however, is on a horizontal plane. Consequently, the effects of the mystery of Golgotha are accessible to nature only through human beings. The world of nature does not experience the being of Christ directly, and because of this, a certain sense of hopelessness is becoming stronger for nature. We can say that humankind is the destiny of nature. We must bring salvation to the world of nature, because we have the moral connection with the spiritual world. But nature has a dynamic connection with the spiritual world. It must obey the world of spirit. Nature can experience the warmth that comes from the sun, but not moral warmth, which can only come from human beings. Unfortunately, this does not happen. Because of this, misfortune occurs again and again in the elemental world. The Bible mentions the primordial chaos, tobu wa bobu. The Genesis of Moses portrays the earth's becoming, particularly from the view of the elemental world. At that time, the beings of nature, the animals, were brought before human beings, who gave them names. Through this act, a certain influence proceeded from humankind towards the beings of nature, and this determined their karma. Human beings determined nature's karma. This occurred during the Lemurian epoch, and the post-Atlantean epoch is a reversed reflection of that Lemurian epoch. Chaos is again rising in the elemental world. It is the duty of humankind to return order into that chaos by using moral powers. All of this chaos makes possible certain influences upon humanity. For example, when Rudolf Steiner spoke of Bolshevism, he said that there are cruel elemental beings behind men, elemental beings who goad human beings to commit acts of cruelty. It is our human task to cure the world of those illnesses. Still, human beings do almost nothing in this way for nature, and thus much of nature has less and less hope for redemption. The etheric return of Christ will signal a restoration of hope for nature. It will be a sign of resurrection for nature. Christ will be active through the horizontal spatial realm. He will visit all the regions of the earth, and this will lead to a meeting with the beings of nature and an active moral force in the world of nature. In the past, this happened through the vertical plane for humankind. Today it happens on the horizontal plane for nature. How can we picture the effect that the Christ will have on nature through his movement through the space of that realm? Much is taking place, and anyone who is truly paying attention can see this. In nature, much happens every year that increasingly contradicts the whole traditional process of nature in the past. Springtime is different from what it used to be. Summer, autumn, and winter are changing as well. In March, we experience the sultry days of summer. People talk of mysterious manifestations. The whole divine revelation of spring, summer, autumn, and winter is mixed up. Chaos is setting in, and this comes not from heaven, but from the interior of the earth. People think that these are merely climate changes, but this is not the case. When orderly changes take place again in nature, these will be the outer signs of Christ's etheric return. Each spring will then breathe a warmth and healing, not evil and sultry days. The summers will include 2 harvests. Nature will breathe out goodness and offer her fruits as though presenting gifts. Now, however, nature does not exude goodness. There is something in nature that is withering. Every year, that withering process increases. Nature has not yet become poisonous for humanity, but the times of spring have become increasingly evil. 3 years will come during which nature will radiate goodness. For example, when people are in despair, they will find remarkable consolation in trees. Goodness will flow from plants into human souls. People have the experience that trees bend before them in goodness and generosity. Goodness will be felt in nature to such a degree that people will not forget it. It will be remembered as a natural marvel. Phenomena such as thunder and lightning will not occur. A breath of goodness will flow from the world of nature, and human nature will feel it as a regeneration and healing. The movement of Christ will progress spatially in concentric circles, and science will designate certain phenomena ozone streams. Tubercular patients will feel better and, in whole regions, be cured simultaneously. People will speak of lines of ozone in the atmosphere, but it will really be the breath of Christ moving in a certain direction over the surface of the earth. For a short period of 3 years, there will be reconciliation between humankind and the world of nature. This is the second event that will take place for nature in relation to the coming of the etheric Christ. Now we are confronted by a third question. What will happen before these 3 years, and how can we prepare an understanding for these events? Before the events, which according to Rudolf Steiner have already begun in the 1930s, they are being prepared within human souls. An angel loses consciousness in the world of spirit. In selflessness, he sacrifices himself to humankind in such a way that his consciousness can be rekindled only when it lights up in the inner human being, in the conscience. It lights up in human beings when the angel's astral body, streaming down to earth, is received. This angel's ether body will remain an empty cup and able to receive the Christ, who will move through space in the form of that angel, the same angel with whom he was already connected 4 times before during his previous sacrifices. Thus, first, the consciousness of the angel is lost, somewhat like fainting spiritually. And on earth, humankind's moral life must be quickened as a means of preparation. There must be awareness of this moral stream that flows down. It will resurrect in human consciousness only when the deep-seated moral questions of human beings come to meet it. The order of events now is the reverse of their occurrence 19 centuries ago. The series begins now with the Pentecost. The actual meeting with Christ as an experience comes later. At the time of the mystery of Golgotha, Christ first descended into the realm of death, and then the Pentecost followed as the last in the series of events. Pentecost was a resurrection in the human soul. This time it happens in reverse. First, the Christ must be understood in his return in the Etheric. Then the meeting in space with Christ, moving in the Etheric, can happen consciously. The significance of his etheric return must now come first to human beings inwardly. Only then will people be able to perceive Christ in the etheric realm. Consequently, it is extremely important that these questions remain at the centre of our inner efforts and search. In this way, the return of Christ will not go unnoticed. To realise this, a general knowledge of spiritual science, knowledge of the ether body, karma and so on, is not enough. People must concern themselves with the matters and connections we have been discussing, and intensive work is needed in relation to this event. Christology today is not an area of knowledge that may or may not be cultivated according to one's preference. It is a need of human destiny, so that we can avoid the misfortune allowing these events to go unnoticed by human consciousness. The Pentecost of our time is the beginning. It is the arising warmth of awakened moral conscience. It is the dawn of understanding the meaning of the etheric return of Christ. The etheric return of Christ as a fact will be perceptible to the extent that this knowledge lives. First the knowledge comes, then the fact. This knowledge is the resurrection of that angel in the inner life of human beings. This is the angel who sacrifices his consciousness to humanity. This is the Pentecost that must precede the meeting with Christ. First come the resurrection and Pentecost, then the coming of Christ himself to live in the sheath of the ether body, which is held ready by that angel. This return will occur in stages as Christ descends through various spheres. Even during the 19th century, it was possible to meet him on the level of intuition. This is why Rudolf Steiner could declare with certainty that this would happen, as well as when it would happen, because he experienced that meeting with the descending Christ on the level of intuition. Now it can be experienced on the level of inspiration. Later on, Christ will arrive in the sphere of imagination. Then people will perceive him in visions that they will surely have, as Rudolf Steiner has described. It is not a matter of a prophecy. We can know from cosmic karma the way one sacrifice of Christ always has the next one as its consequence. How the mystery of Golgotha was the inevitable consequence of the 4 preceding sacrifices, and how the 5th sacrifice is determined by the mystery of Golgotha. The 5th sacrifice of Christ is karmically determined by the essence of the mystery of Golgotha. Thus, one can know for certain that it will happen. This is not a prophecy based on trust, but a matter of certain knowledge from all that makes up Anthroposophy.